Agomidasi, West African Fonte on this Sunday. Just saying, attention everyone, and thank you for being here. We hope you are maintaining the highest expression of mental, physical, and spiritual health that you can possibly generate today and every day. And we are so happy that you decided to spend your time with this program that we have in place here every Sunday, 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We welcome you today for this critical topic. Every topic is a critical topic, but why Pan-Africanism is the highest expression of Black power. A lot of people use the phrase Black power, and it's been used prolifically for the last 60, 70 years, but very seldom is it ever clearly defined. And to even lesser extent, Pan-Africanism is a phrase that's out here and I would argue is much more misunderstood than properly understood. So today what we're going to do is dissect what Black power is. What is it? What is Pan-Africanism? Are they the same thing? If they are not the same thing, what are the differences? And why we say that Pan-Africanism is the highest expression of Black power. And to start, as we always do, we want to do land acknowledgement and acknowledge the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. I'm here in Miwok people territory, and we acknowledge the Miwok people and all the indigenous people whose land was stolen from them as they continue to organize and fight to get their land back. Regardless of you knowing that they're doing that or not knowing that they're doing that, that's exactly what they're doing. And when we say indigenous people, we're talking about people like the Miwok. We're not talking about anybody else that's confused about land and history, that thinks that you're a part of being indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. If you're not American Indian, you're not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. You either are the descendants of thuggish settlers, or you were kidnapped like my ancestors and brought here, or you were forced to come here because colonialism eliminated possibilities for you in whatever country your people came from. So this is the reality, and we want to always acknowledge reality and truth. And the truth is, this is the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere's land, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with them. We sit shoulder to shoulder with them. We lie shoulder to shoulder with them in getting their land back. And on that point, we also give complete respect and acknowledgement to our African ancestors, who are the very reason why we breathe air today. There's a lot of confusion among our African people, and people are even so audacious, have such audacity with the confusion that you even see somebody wearing a shirt that says, "I am not my ancestors." And that is the most absurd statement and a clear indication of someone who doesn't know their history, because the only reason you are here today is because some ancestor stood up and fought so that your lineage could stay intact and you could survive and exist today. If you're living today, you owe a debt to your African ancestors, and saying you are not your ancestors is the highest form of ignorance and disrespect to those millions of Africans who struggled so that we could exist here today. So we don't take lightly this disrespect of our people and our history. So we want to pay homage and respect to our ancestors, and we thank them. We can never thank them enough. All we can do is continue to carry on the dignity of the struggle that they initiated. And that's what we intend to do. So we're glad you're here with us today. And we'll start, as we always do, with just some brief intros to who we are. And first, I am a Jamu, longtime organizer in the All African People's Revolutionary Party all over the world. Good to see you all here. And joining me is Shakura, my daughter, who grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute, and now herself participates within the All African People's Revolutionary Party and All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And she's also a student completing her PhD studies in communication public health around African women's health issues, of which she is also a committed activist engaging around those issues. So always thankful to be able to have this relationship with her and do this work. And then going back to the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we are an independent mass revolutionary Pan-African political party based in Africa with chapters all over the African world. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we'll be talking about today. One unified socialist Africa is the definition for Pan-Africanism. That's what we want. And if you look to the right, you see the book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, written by Kwame Nkrumah in 1968. That, as it says, is our handbook for how we strategically are working to achieve Pan-Africanism. And if you didn't get a chance to observe African Liberation Day this week, shame on you. You should go to YouTube and watch the videos, because if you want to understand what Pan-Africanism is, African Liberation Day is simply an example of what Pan-Africanism looks like. So you see the logos of Pan-African formations on the screen. And in our African Liberation Day programs that we had last Sunday and last Tuesday on the actual day, May 25th, we had participants in the program from all of these organizations: the Democratic Party of Guinea, the logo you see with the elephant there, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, had several participants. In fact, the president of the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau gave the keynote presentation for African Liberation Day. The Amilcar Cabral Ideological School there, ACIS movement, had multiple participants. And then we also sponsored and helped facilitate African Liberation Day events on the ground throughout Africa. The Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists there, their logo was on the bottom right. And they had African Liberation Day. And that was the particular site that I was assigned to be their person of contact for support. And so this past week was in constant contact with the comrades there, and they sent me pictures, and they had a wonderful African Liberation Day program. And they also, along with that, had a football tournament, or what people here call soccer, as a part of African Liberation Day. They had the youth engaged. It was wonderful indeed. We had earlier today, we participated in African Liberation Day in Azania, or what you call South Africa, the PAC there, Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and participated. And our party was, of course, a part of that with our sister party, the PAC. And we continued to have an entire week of African Liberation Day commemorations. And as I mentioned, we have chapters worldwide and relationships with other liberation movements. So that leads us perfectly into the topic for today, why Pan-Africanism is the highest expression of Black power. To get us started, here is Shukura.
Thank you, Daddy. Greetings, everyone. I hope you all are in good spirits. I feel really fired up today because this is probably one of my top 5 favorite seminars. And I love this concept because more often than not, we are socialized to understand that Africans who are born in the US are very different and separate from Africans born anywhere else, especially on the continent. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So, you know, when you hear Black power, I definitely hope that you will correlate that with Pan-Africanism, because hopefully by the end of the seminar today, you'll understand that you can't have one without the other, and they literally feed off of one another, okay? So we know that this phenomenal person in this photo here is Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. And Kwame knew that Africans were already up against systems of oppression each day based on their race. In some cases, they were up against systems of oppression because of their race and their class and their gender, okay? So Kwame wanted us to use our race and culture and knowledge of self and Pan-Africanism as a force field to organize and resist the oppressive systems. He wanted us to run toward the struggle, not away from it. Contrary to societal beliefs and training, he also wanted us to understand that our race was nothing to be ashamed of or apologetic about. Kwame was arguing that our actual struggle is one for power, and power is defined by who owns and controls the land and resources. Part of the reason Africans are not valued all over the world, and I've said this before, is due to a couple of reasons. One, Africa itself is not respected, but instead exploited for resources, tools, and materials. And two, thus Africans are not respected because our lack of connection to owning land equals power. And so because we don't have the land, we don't have the power. The same is true for the Palestinians. They had their land taken away, and as a result, society is not respecting them at this time. The same is true for the indigenous people. They had their land taken, and as a result, society is not acknowledging or respecting them. It's even happened in Ireland and has happened in other parts of the world. And just to speak to my dad's point about how we're connected with other organizations of folks who are trying to get their land back, we had speakers from Haiti at ALD. We had speakers from the Irish Socialist Association. I think that's the name of the organization. But my point is, we connect with all different types of people. We're connected with Palestinians who are doing organizing to get their land back. So it's not just that we want Africans to have Africa. No, we're in support of the Palestinians getting their land back. Of course, the indigenous people getting their land back. And we're stopping at nothing because we understand that these different groups are all lacking power. Why? Because they don't have what's rightfully theirs, and that's land. And in this world, we understand power to be equated with land based on space, because if you have land, you can have agriculture and you can develop resources. You can grow things that you need that you can turn around and sell at a later point in time, okay? So I want us to be very clear that Africa is currently invaded by unwelcome colonists with capitalist and imperialist values and methods. And so this is why the AAPRP repeatedly argues that not only do Africans need to have their land back, but we need to remove and eradicate any leftover presence of disgusting stench and energy of systems of oppression. We instead need a system based on justice and love, and that would be socialism. Next slide, please. So when we say our land, Africa, we refer to Africa as a vessel to meet people's needs, not as a means to privately own real estate. We argue that Africa is a vessel because many Africans are disconnected to self, disassembled, and unaware of who their ancestors are. They also are unaware of where they came from, nor are they aware of what they are capable of doing. More often than not, Africans have been socialized to understand and fight for protection of oppressive systems. So it is clear that one would move to Africa carrying those materialistic values with them. But this is precisely why Africans need to be redirected and guided, because we are trying to drive oppressive systems out of Africa, not multiply them. Those systems are the exact reason we are in this predicament. Colonialism has taught us everything we know, but political education can help us research and unlearn the nonsense and instead make room in our brains and memory for truth, justice, and a higher self-esteem, which would equate to a higher self-efficacy, because a lot of us need work in terms of believing that we can, in fact, reach a 100% socialist Africa. It can be done, and that's why we need to work together so that we can work with other organizations that are working towards the same objective. The first slide clearly indicates different examples of that. And this is why we need to do research, which is why political education is important. Simply put, if we own our own land, then we can cease the exploitation, the murder, and the mistreatment of our people. Furthermore, we can control and determine how the resources are used and determine collective approaches of how Africans can heal, how Africa can heal and rebuild from being under a vicious thumb of crooks and thieves for so long. Look at Cuba as an example of both a socialist country and one that is independent and facilitates how resources are used and spent. Last but not least, the wealth of the capitalist world led by the US is based largely on the siphoning of Africa's human and material resources. However, if we organize and fight against it, we can stop that. The people in Congo fought against it. Ghanaian people, Ugandan people. We are used to fighting, and we will continue until we have what is ours. Next slide, please. Society has disassembled us so that we have no connection to Africa. And when we see Africa in the media, we are exposed to lies and mistruths based on white supremacy. Many of us have not been to Africa, nor have we researched or read about it. So our ability to connect with ideas that have been framed by European capitalists has tainted our attraction to our rightful identity. Due to this, we have been trying to, quote, survive and adopt new identities. This means accepting the imperialistic lifestyles and taking new land that is not ours for our own and stealing it just as the imperialists did. It is our responsibility to seek truth, knowledge, and travel to our rightful home. Save up and invest in a passport. Then save up and organize a trip to go home. Traveling outside of the US will be humbling, and I guarantee you your perspective will shift when you see no difference in Africans at home versus Africans in Costa Rica versus Africans in Nashville. We are all the same everywhere. We are oppressed everywhere, and we all belong to the African nation, as Kwame Nkrumah said. When you accept American identity, this means that you consent to American identity, which means you agree with white supremacy. Furthermore, you accept to engage in disrespecting and exploiting of indigenous people, just as others have, because if you are affiliated with American identity, then that means you are with the system that is against indigenous people and in promotion of stealing their land. Again, why accept a false identity when you can learn your own and feel the energy and presence of your ancestors and start a new cycle of teaching your children or godchildren or nieces and nephews truth and light about who they are? They deserve to know the truth, and we shouldn't have to make up fables and stories because we haven't done the research. The information is out there. We just need to sit down and read. Africa is the only place we have to just claim that. And so for any Africans who don't want to claim Africa, or are Africans who, they are Africans who don't know anything about. I know it's scary because for some, we have to unlearn what we have known our whole lives, even though they're all lies and not truth. But for some, that's scary for us because that's all we know. And I understand that. But here's the upside. Once you begin the unlearning process, so you start this political education, you start learning about Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré and Kwame Touré and different people who have helped to fight the Congo to resist the colonists, different people in Ghana who have helped to resist the colonists. Once you start learning about your ancestors and the history, and you start unlearning about the lies that have been told to you in education that you may have occurred here in the US or even somewhere else, you're no longer contributing to the exploitation of indigenous people. That's amazing. And you can start to rely on some of that resilient energy that has carried our people so far before. We are a resilient people. We are extremely resilient. So you have it in you to start anew. This is not something that can't be done. Remember, our people were scared when they were kidnapped, but they found ways to survive. They found ways to communicate. And they found ways to escape, all the while being aware of the dangers and risk that lay ahead. Africans come from inventors, innovators, revolutionaries, and so many other positions that have made conditions for Africans better. Africans today come from that same blood. Find it, tap into it. And one way to tap into it is by visiting the slave castles in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakura. I really appreciate how you frame that discussion. And I know there might be some people who listen to you and they might say, well, I tuned in here because I thought I was going to get an explanation of what Pan-Africanism is compared to Black Power. Well, that's exactly what you're getting. But the framework is critically important because we have to understand that a lot of what drives these analyses is based in the class struggle taking place among the African masses, among all of humanity. But we're talking about, our concepts now, Black Power, Pan-Africanism. So we're talking specifically about the African masses. A lot of how we interpret and understand these concepts is driven by class struggle among our people. And what we mean by class struggle is there have always been, and there always will be, a people's class, as Sekou Touré titled it. And the people's class, under Touré's analysis, are the people who think and act in the interests of the masses of humanity. That's the people's class. And there have always been, and there always will be, an anti-people's class, as Sekou Touré defined it. And the anti-people's class, in his words, are the class of people who work in the interests of the capitalist and imperialist system against the masses of humanity. So Touré's definition of the people's class and the anti-people's class was a very critically important tool for my own development and understanding of the struggle we're engaged in, because we all who are, consider ourselves radical leftists, we came up with the Marxist-Leninist analysis of class, which is a great analysis. The ruling capitalist classes, bourgeoisie, petty bourgeoisie, working class, peasant class, lumpen proletariat class. If you don't know what all that is, we got seminars, past seminars on it. There's so much material on it out here. If you don't know, it's only because you don't want to know. Like, if you want to know, you can know immediately. So if you want to know, like, go check out some of those resources and get a better understanding of that. We're not going to explain it all here. But the point is that class analysis by Marx was great in terms of defining class in the context of the Marxist-Leninist definition of everything being defined primarily through a materialist lens. But us as revolutionary Pan-Africanists, or in Nkrumah's Touréists, have a different ideological focus than those honored comrades who are Marxist-Leninists. Our ideology comes from our culture, our African culture. And so we recognize, as Sékou Touré did when he developed the people's class, anti-people's class analysis, that we don't believe that we can fully understand class struggle just in terms of people's material relationship to the means of production. We believe that it also has to include people's ideological connection to the means of production. So when Touré is talking about the people's class, he's saying that there can be people who are bred to be a part of the petty bourgeoisie class. For example, what I mean by bred is that they're sent to college and they're miseducated through the bourgeoisie education system, and they're taught that, what they need to be trying to do is become middle managers for the capitalist system and operate under all the ideological tenets that comes with, i.e., you can't be trusted to work, so my responsibility is to stay on top of you and make sure you're working, because that's what the master wants. And we all have had managers and bosses who have micromanaged just that way. That's what that is because these people have ideologically accepted the premise that workers cannot be trusted, which is clearly an ideological tenet that benefits the ruling class. Nobody can argue that. So that's important to point out, that those people accept an idea. It's not just strictly based on their material situation, but the idea is as much a part of it as their material situation. In terms of the anti-people's class, you could have people that are working class people that can decide. You can have peasants. You can have working class people who decide that they want to ally themselves with the interests of the ruling class. And this happens all day, every day. So we know we can't just look at people's material conditions and say, okay, they're part of the working class, so that means they're automatically aligned with the working class. No, you can only base that on their actions and what they believe in and what they're pursuing for their interests. So this is what Sékou Touré was talking about when he talked about the people's class and the anti-people's class. And that's an important element to understand this question of Black power, because the concept of Black power, that's a call to action. That's what that is. What it's doing is saying that as African people, we recognize that we need our own power to determine our destiny. That's what Black power does. It makes that call. It makes that assertion that that's what we mean. But the challenge in Black power is that beyond that, it was never really clearly defined in a specific term. Still to this day, that hasn't happened. And if you look at the people who, if you just look at the 1960s, the people who were most responsible for popularizing the term Black power, and that would go specifically, I would say, to Kwame Touré, Stokely Carmichael, and Mukasa Dada, formerly Willie Ricks. So they were both organizers in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. And when they organized during the March Against Fear in June of 1966. James Meredith started the March Against Fear because he wanted to show Africans in Mississippi that they should not be afraid and they should stand up. And of course, Meredith was the first African to graduate from the University of Mississippi. And so he felt that he could do a single person march and show people he wasn't afraid and that this would be something that would benefit the consciousness of our people. Unfortunately, the second day of the march, he was shot by a white racist. He wasn't killed, but he was, of course, unable to finish that march. And so the civil rights organizations at that time, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, of which Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael then, had just recently defeated John Lewis as chairperson, signaling the move to African nationalism and away from integrationism by SNCC, and the Congress of Racial Equality, through its chair at the time, Floyd McKissick. They met in Memphis, Tennessee in June of 1966 to announce that they would continue Meredith's March Against Fear. And during the march, which was really the last huge civil rights march in this country, SNCC had a strategy. Up to that point, the dominant theory in that march, in all the marches, in the entire civil rights movement, the dominant theory was SCLC, Dr. King's slogan of freedom now. That was the dominant chant. That was the dominant theme. That was what people chanted while they marched. That was the spirit of it, which was based again in the Southern Christian concept of pushing for integration and nonviolent civil disobedience. What SNCC wanted to do during this march was change the focus, because SNCC had a very different history from SCLC. And this is something that most of us don't understand at all today. SCLC and Dr. Martin Luther King were a mobilization organization. And we've talked about this. So if you don't know the difference between mobilization and organization, we have a specific workshop where we address that issue. So, you should go on YouTube and look it up and study it so you understand it. But just for the quick definition, so when I say SCLC was a mobilization organization, what that means is that if you think of SCLC's work, their work was always designed to have huge events to bring into vision that a problem existed, with the intention of raising people's awareness of this problem so that further efforts could be engaged in to address the problem. There is nothing wrong with that. That's a very necessary and essential part of movement work. But SCLC events included things like the March on Washington, August 28, 1963. That's a mobilization event, meaning the people that went to the March on Washington, they went there, they heard about the problem of institutional racism. You might, if you talk to someone who went to that march in 1963, they might have stayed at the march they might have traveled there, sat next to people, stayed at the march all day next to people, traveled back next to people who participated, and they may have never learned the people's names that they were interacting with during the course of that event. And they certainly, more than likely, I would say almost completely, never had any engagement with any of those people after that day. That's the definition of mobilization. Its purpose, to bring people together, to bring awareness to a problem. And then once the event is over, your interaction with people involved in that is over for the most part, unless you initiate something on an individual level. But for the most part, that doesn't happen. We've all been to marches where you march with people, you don't know who they are, you don't know what they believe, you don't know what their objectives are, and then you leave the march, and for the most of those people, you never see them again in your entire life. So that was SCLC. Nothing, again, wrong with that, but that's what they were, a mobilization organization. SNCC, on the other hand, engaged in organizing work. In 1964, they helped build the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And their objective for doing that in Mississippi was to challenge the institutional racism within the Democratic Party. And they did that by organizing the African communities in Mississippi to galvanize enough support so that the Democratic Party would have to seat their delegates from the MFDP. the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And of course, if you know the history, the Democratic Party, racist to the core, did everything it could to undermine the efforts of the MFDP at the Democratic Party National Convention in 1964. The MFDP still came away with victories. In fact, it was that process that forced the Democratic Party to open itself up, which is the reason why you have all these neo-colonial puppets in it that are brown people. Obama, Kamala Harris, all of that resulted from the work that SNCC did. But the organizers in SNCC knew that the efforts of the Democratic Party to sabotage and undermine the MFDP's efforts showed the weakness of organizing within the system and showed how it would prevent us from gaining power to rely on that strategy. And so the next year, SNCC moved to Alabama and participated in building the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, better known as the original Black Panther Party, which, unlike the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in Mississippi, was an independent African political party. Anybody could have joined it. Europeans could have joined it. Anybody could have joined it, but none of them in Mississippi in 1965, no European was going to join an African political party. So the party was an African political party. And because 80% of the people in Lowndes County, Alabama, could not read or write, and because of the violence was so intense there, they called it Bloody Lowndes. The organizers in the Lowndes County Freedom Organization relied on their symbol, a Black Panther, and they were armed to protect themselves. And Mark Comfort, a young man from Oakland, came as SNCC work entailed. If you know it, people from all over the country, primarily college students and young people, came to participate in the SNCC project. So Mark Comfort was a young African from Oakland, California. He went and participated in Alabama with SNCC and the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. And he happened to know Huey P. Newton and went back to Oakland and told Huey, hey, these Black people in Alabama got guns and they're organizing this Black Panther Party. So this is where Huey Newton got the idea. And if you read Huey Newton's autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide, he talks about how he wrote to Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael then, and asked him if it was okay to use the Black Panther Party symbol. So that's the history of that. And so when Kwame Ture, at the urging of Mukasa Dada, who was Willie Ricks then, because Mukasa went ahead of the March Against Fear to towns in front of the march and would organize 30, 40, 50 people around the Black Power slogan. Sharecroppers, people in the small towns. This was extremely dangerous work, but he did it because this is a fearless African, and he did that. He's still a fearless African today. We're still fortunate enough to be inspired by his living example today. And so this is the work that he did. And so when they got to Greenwood, Mississippi, and they were harassed relentlessly by the National Guards people and white supremacists, and Kwame Ture got up on the bus with Martin Luther King, and Mukasa, Willie Ricks, formerly Willie Ricks, was up there with him, and Mukasa was telling Kwame, say it, the people are ready for it, say Black Power, this is where we need to launch it. And Kwame, as he always admitted, was not sure. He didn't know if that was true. And he finally listened to his comrade and he said it, and the people thundered their response, Black Power, that's what we need. And it became not only a national movement, but an international movement. But it was never clearly defined what it meant. And because of that, anyone who would come along was able to interpret it and actualize it whatever way they wanted. And even those two brothers, Kwame Ture and Mukasa Dada, they evolved politically, culturally, etc., to the point where they eventually both had long life experiences within the All-African People's Revolutionary Party and the Pan-African movement, and began to evolve to the point where, as Kwame Ture articulated in a 1989 interview, when he was asked if he was going to accept and start using the term African American, he said, no, we're not Americans, we're Africans in America fighting American capitalism. And he said that in the 60s, when we accepted the term Black, we did that because we saw our struggle as a struggle against white racism. But as he put it, human evolution doesn't stand still. It continues to move. And so we evolved and we learned that really what we're struggling for is not just against white racism, but we're struggling for power as a people. And power has to be connected to land. And the only land we have any right to is Africa, because this land belongs to the indigenous people. And so that means that our struggle really has to be a struggle to liberate Africa. So that's why he said our correct definition and identity is not Black, not African American, but Africans, wherever we reside on the planet Earth. So the challenge with Black power as a concept is that because it was never clearly defined, and it leaves that door open for people to interpret it whatever way they want, this is what we have come to see. So Black power can mean anything. It can mean an individual African obtaining wealth, and a lot of people will tell you that's Black power. Okay, and you can't really argue with them because there isn't a clear definition of what that means, right? So you could argue with them, you know, in terms of the concepts of what power being defined as power for the organized masses, but Black power itself has never really officially, you know, no one has ever developed that organizationally to make that, you know, on a broad scale what it means. So give me an example. Here in Sacramento, California, in the United Snakes where I live, there's a man that lives here named Kevin Johnson. And many of you, especially if you follow professional sports, you would know him as a former point guard in the National Basketball Association, the NBA. Very good basketball player who played the bulk of his career for the Phoenix Suns in the NBA. And he's from this city, and he still lives here. And he has a number of businesses in the Oak Park area of the city, which is a traditionally dominant African community. It's being heavily gentrified, so that's probably not going to be the case much longer. But he has a restaurant and a bookstore and a pizza parlor all within a 2-block radius in this neighborhood today. And so a lot of people would look at that and they would say, well, that's an example of Black power because he's stopping gentrification. He's creating business opportunities for our people. A lot of people will tell you that. A lot of people who are listening to this right now would agree with that. Yeah, that's what that is. But we would challenge that because we would say that, okay, you know, the food might be pretty good at the restaurant, but the concrete reality is that the young people he has working there, he's paying them minimum wage just as they would make at any other restaurant that wasn't owned by an African. He's not paying for their medical benefits as would be the case in any other restaurant that it was owned by any other people. So yeah, I mean, it's good. I think it's great because he does have a lot of, you know, young African people employed there. But to argue that this is an example of how we empower the masses of our people, that's an insane argument. Really, that's not what that's designed to do. What it does do is create revenues for him personally and his family. It allows some people to continue to tread water in the capitalist system and try to do whatever they can to keep from drowning. But that's about it. And none of that is the definition of power that we want to use, which is power for the masses of people. Now, that is not to say that Pan-Africanism also has some arbitrariness in terms of how people define it. Everything in the capitalist system has that, because that's how bourgeois idealism works. But at least with Pan-Africanism, there is a history of a specific and legitimate definition. So if we know this, and we know it's true because we know the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England in 1945, convened by one Kwame Nkrumah with W.E.B. Du Bois there as the symbolic chair, and as Amy Jock Garvey there as the symbolic chair, that they came out of that 5th Pan-African Congress with the definition and objective needed for Africa of Pan-Africanism, which was defined at that time as the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, or as we say it in the shortened sense, one unified socialist Africa. So although people try to come and they say, well, Pan-Africanism is just Black people being in unity with one another, nebulous, not real clear what that means when they say unity. But we can always come back and crush that, like, that's not what Pan-Africanism is. Pan-Africanism is one unified socialist Africa. It doesn't mean some African in San Francisco who has a business and wants to and goes to Africa and sells jeans to people in Africa at a discounted price, but while he's profiting off of it, that's not Pan-Africanism. Okay, that's capitalism, you know, or at the very best, it's just somebody trying to make a survival, but it's doing it within the context of the rules and system provided to us by capitalism. So, you know, we at least have that. We have the ability to say, like, this is the definition of what Pan-Africanism is. And of course, because we have that, then we can identify the principal tenets that apply to this definition of Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa that the concept of Black power, the nebulous concept of Black power, doesn't have. For example, we can say Africa is our land. Any person of African descent, Africa is the just land that belongs to you. Doesn't matter where you live. Doesn't matter if you have ever gone to Africa or ever planned to go to Africa or not. That's irrelevant, 100% irrelevant. It doesn't negate the fact that Africa is still the only land base you have a right to. Marcus Mosiah Garvey, one of the greatest sons Africa has ever produced, never went to Africa. So clearly, again, getting back to Secretary's analysis of the people's class, anti-people's class, we are talking about what people's ideas are and how they live to bring those ideas about. So without question, Marcus Garvey, the fact that he was born in Jamaica, raised in Jamaica, lived in the US, lived in Britain, has nothing to do with the fact that that man was unquestionably an African. No question about it. And so this is important for us to understand about this question, because when we have that kind of principled stance, that's why we can say this is the indigenous people's land, because we want a movement based on justice. We don't want to do the same thing to other people that has been done to us. We don't want to negate justice for other folks because we know how it feels because it's being negated against us. So we want to stand on justice. We want to acknowledge. We don't want to say that we were the first people in occupied Palestine and we're the original Jews. We want to say that the occupied Palestine belongs to the Palestinian people, nobody else. We don't want to say that, well, we built part of this country. We built it up so it belongs to this. Hey, if somebody steals your house and builds a bigger house on it, you can't come to say, you're not going to say, well, no, that's okay. They built a better house than what I had, so I guess I'm just going to let this. No, you're going to say, this is my house. It was stolen from me. So this is the indigenous people's land. Hey, we were unfortunately exploited and oppressed for 500 years. Yeah, we did provide free labor for 350 years to build up this entire hemisphere. But that is a part of that needs to be a part of our understanding that this was a part of the effort to exploit Africa and Africans. So once we regain Africa, make her independent, make her socialist, then we have the resources to recoup that. That's where the reparations come in. That's what reparations properly defined actually represents. Anything short of that, talking about some payments going to somebody's bank account, is just a scam and a con designed by some people to make themselves some money. That's all that is. It's a pimp job designed to sell out our people's suffering. That's all that is. That's all that is. And the people promoting that don't even have sense. You see where the people in Namibia just recently were offered financial payment by Germany for Germany's colonialism and exploitation in Namibia. They offered them millions of dollars. The people in Namibia don't want that. They want their land back that these people are still colonizing. The indigenous people get offered money for the theft of the Paha Sapper, which you all call Mount Rushmore. They don't want no money. They want their sacred lands back. Only the Africans in America are the only people, I'm sorry, stupid enough to sell out our suffering for some money. That's a disgrace. And the people calling for that are lower, in my view, than roaches for doing that. I'm not going to disrespect the legacy of my people. We want reparations, sure, but we don't want reparation. Can't be reduced to no damn payment, no ACH payment in my checking account. That's nonsense. That's totally disrespectful to the suffering our people have endured for 529 years. We want the total freedom and liberation of Africa under scientific socialism, and nobody is going to give that to us. We have to fight for that. And once we have that, we will have the means to provide for all 2.5 billion of our people living in 120 countries all over the world. That's the reparations that we're talking about. So Pan-Africanism has that type of analysis attached to it. If you understand what Pan-Africanism is, you can't refute that. So it has a principle foundation. And it requires that because of that, that we don't see ourselves as the same as our oppressors. We can't imitate our oppressors. We can't pretend that emulating their model is going to free our people. That's clearly exposed under revolutionary Pan-Africanism. It's not when people chant Black Power. It can be anything. But when someone says, I'm a Pan-Africanist, no, we don't hold you accountable to what that means. And that requires you to engage in work that has to be focused on the power of the organized masses. And anything short of that, you're just a con person trying to sell out our people for a payday. That's it. That's what that's about. So, along with that, we can talk about Black Power realized in real time. Pan-Africanism and Black Power realized in real time, because we don't want to suggest that Black Power has nothing to do with Pan-Africanism. Of course it does. Black Power, think of it like this, those that know weapons, think of it like this. Black Power is the Russian-made SKS rifle. Pan-Africanism is the AK-47. And if you know anything about weapons, the SKS was the World War II version that eventually the Russians, Chinese, Serbians, all these people evolved into the AK-47 rifle. The AK has more capability than SKS. It has more power. It has better accuracy. It has all of those things. I speak from experience. So what that equates to is we're saying that Pan-Africanism is the highest version of Black Power realized in real time. And what we mean by that is, like we said, Black Power is a call to action. But Pan-Africanism is the correct response to that call. Because instead of just having a nebulous thing with Black Power, what does that mean? With Pan-Africanism, as I just stated, now we have an objective. One unified socialist Africa. And just by that, anybody that adheres to the call has the responsibility to think and behave in a certain way. Like, you can't be trying to pimp our people and then say you want Pan-Africanism. You can't be trying to deny justice for the indigenous people and say you want Pan-Africanism, deny justice for the Palestinians and say you want Pan-Africanism, deny justice for the Irish and say you want Pan-Africanism. You can't be saying, well, Africa, I've never been there, so it doesn't really matter to me. I don't know anything about it. And say you're a Pan-Africanist. You have a responsibility. As soon as you say that, you got to go to work. You got to study and understand what's happening to your mother in Africa. And you have to do what Shakura said. You got to plan so that you can get home in an organized fashion. Stop making excuses. Well, I can't afford to go to Africa. People say that. People have said that to me for years, and I go in their houses and they got way better furniture than I ever will have. They got way better, more expensive cars than I ever will have. And I'm not saying you can't have nice clothes, cars, and expensive furniture, but don't make that your priority and then say you can't afford to go home to Africa. That's just a cop-out. And it's a lie, really. It's just not your priority. Just be honest about that. because there's a way. I've helped a lot of people figure out how to save money to get home. And because I've been to Africa often enough, I know how to get there cheaply. So there's all kind of resources to get home to Africa. And I drive a 16-year-old vehicle. It looks just as good and runs just as good as yours. But the reason why I do that, you all, is so I can go to Africa every year and go home, because that's my priority. Having a nice car with a payment is not my priority. I got Goodwill furniture in my house, absolutely, because I want to be able to go home. I want it to be able to ensure that my daughter Shakura can go home. She's been to Africa multiple times. But that comes from having that focus and that commitment and that priority, and understanding that for me, Africa's primary. It's primary to me. If it's not to you, then no, you're not going to see it. You're not even going to have a passport, because you're not. That's not what your focus is. That's not what you're trying to do. And I'm not judging you for that. I'm just saying we need to be honest and stop lying. Oh, I can't afford to get there. And you just, you spend $300-400 a month on weed and alcohol. Well, yeah, of course you can't afford it, because that's not your priority. Is getting high, getting drunk, and feeling good. Not judging you, but just saying we got to be honest, you all. We're not going to go along with your dishonesty. We're going to tell the truth. That's what we do here. So if you don't want to hear the truth, you're just in the wrong place. Sorry, but this is what we have to do, because Pan-Africanism is the correct response to the call for Black power. And when we dissect that, what people mean when they say Black power, we've talked about the ways in which it conflicts with revolutionary Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism is class war against all forms of oppression. See, you could say you're for Black power, and because it's nebulous and it's not clearly defined, you could be for Black power, you could be xenophobic, you could be against Africans and born in other countries and say you're for Black power. You can be patriarchal. You can be in favor of a lot of these people that say they're for Black power are patriarchal. They support institutions that oppress women and women identifying people, like polygamy. They believe in domestic violence and say they're for Black power. They believe they're homophobic and say they're for Black power. And that's all okay under the nebulous, non-defined definition of Black power. But under revolutionary Pan-Africanism, it requires that you are a part of the people's class. And in order to be a part of the people's class, you have to be against all forms of oppression. So you cannot be a revolutionary Pan-Africanist and be for patriarchy and the oppression and exploitation of women and women identifying people. You can't be for revolutionary Pan-Africanism and be sitting up here talking about if somebody's gay, they can't be a part of our movement. If somebody's trans, they can't be a part of our movement. I would rather have them be my comrades than you. I've said that to many so-called quote unquote Black nationalists who say they're for Black power. And as soon as the police come, yes, sir, boss. You want me to move? Yes, sir, boss. I'll move. No problem, boss. Yes, sir. And these trans people you talking about, these trans Africans, I've gone to war with these folks. And I had an African trans woman when we were liberating houses in Portland, Oregon in 2013. And the police came there with tear gas and sprayed us all and wanted to arrest everybody. And I knocked the cops down. I don't care. I'm going to say it. That's what happened, because we had a board and that's what happened. And this, they came and attempted to grab me, and the African trans person threw their body at the police to prevent them from grabbing me. And now you keyboard Black nationalist patriarchal buffoons want to tell me, well, that person can't be a part of nothing I'm involved in. Well, then get the hell out of here, because you're not doing anything anyway. I'll take them over you any day of the week. So anybody that's truly for revolutionary Pan-Africanism, and I'm saying that as a cis heterosexual man, okay, you ain't no revolutionary Pan-Africanist, because you're not imbuing the principles of collectivity and humanism that define African culture. You're not doing that. you're operating under some xenophobic white supremacist agenda. And we don't want that. We don't need it. It does nothing to bring our people together. We can't have unity with just some people. Unity means unity with all our people, or there's no unity with none of our people. And you just got to get on board with that. We're ready to wage war with you on these questions. So, you know, just saying that make all this happen, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, we got to have everybody in an organization. Everybody's got to be in an organization. We can't have only 3% of our people in organizations and ever expect that we're going to get free. And everybody running their mouth and don't, you know, that if you're not in an organization and you're talking about what our people need to be free, that's like me sitting up here talking about what it's like to deliver a baby out of my body. Absolutely worthless. You don't know anything about it. All you have done is observe other people do it, and you think you understand it based on that. Absolutely worthless. And we don't need to, we have no intention of listening to you because you're not even serious about it. You got to be in an organization. There's no argument about that. And then every segment of our society has to be organized around Africa. If you look at the Zionist state of Israel, they got people who were born in this country or born in other countries, never been to occupied Palestine. Their priority is protecting Zionist Israel. And they're wrong. They're not even correct in their analysis. They're land thieves. But yet they understand that in order for them to be successful with their scam, they got to protect Zionist Israel. So we have every right to protect Africa. So that's what we got to do to build what we're talking about. That has to happen. And it doesn't matter where we are in the world, we can organize locally for Pan-Africanism. Even if you can't go to Africa for whatever reason, or you're not able to go, because there certainly are people that fall in that category, you still can do work wherever you are to help bring about Pan-Africanism. You know, I was in the All African People's Revolutionary Party 5 or 6 years before I went to Africa for the first time. You know, almost 40 years ago. So it doesn't matter where you are. It's like Kwame Nkrumah said, you're not African because you were born in Africa. You're African because Africa was born in you. So we have to understand that. That is so true. And we talked about the difference between mobilization and organization work, and revolutionary Pan-Africanist work is organizing work, organizing the fusion of all these organizations you see here. And if you looked at any of our African Liberation Day programs, you saw that in real time. That's the work that we're doing. And that's what we need to do to bring it about. And once we do that, that's Black power in a healthy, respectable, qualified sense. Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. So again, please join an organization working for justice. We will never tire of saying that. And if you don't want to, if you want to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party and you're African, we would love to have you do that. You can see the address there, www.aprp-intl.org. Contact there. You'll go through a brief orientation video, and then it'll connect you to the person closest in your area. We would love to have you do that. A lot of you are doing that. We appreciate that. And if you don't want to join the APRP, join some other organization. There are many of them out here, and you can join them. And if you don't want to join any of those, then start one. There's no way to escape the responsibility. We got to get people engaged in organizing work. And then the second URL there, www.abetterworld.me, a John Mooney's Truth Challenge. You can reach out to Shakura and I there. A lot of you do that. We appreciate you for that. Just wrote an article and posted it there about Memorial Day and how Memorial Day is another day to glorify imperialism, and it has nothing to do with supporting. If you want to support, if you really were serious about supporting these people that served as mercenaries in the U.S. military, you would start with the people standing on all the freeway off ramps, or you drive right by them and don't even look twice, talking about support our troops. That's a bunch of foolishness, and you're not fooling us with that nonsense. You know, when people say support the troops, really what they mean is they don't care how many people in U.S. military are maimed or killed, or how many people they maim and kill, as long as they can retain their physical comfort and privilege, then yeah, support the troops, doing whatever it takes to keep you in comfort. That's what people mean when they say that. And then www.hoodcommunist.org, outstanding site. I'm on the editorial collective there, articles there. Check that out. Sign up for our newsletter. Support the revolutionary writings there. And if you're African and you have something to write, submit it to us there at hoodcommunist.org. Submit articles to us, okay? We've got a number of podcasts going on. Obviously, we have this one, Pantula, every Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Forward Ever podcast on Saturdays. Revolutionary African Women takes place. Our comrades in the New Mexico APRP chapter, 11 a.m. Mountain Time every Thursday. You should join each and every one of those. They are all outstanding. Obviously, Shakur and I are here every Sunday from 4 to 5 Pacific Time. And next week, we invite you back on June 6th. We're going to be talking about growing up revolutionary, Pan-Africanist, socialist in a backward society. This is essentially going to be Shakur talking about what her life was like growing up with revolutionary values and practice all around her, and with me chiming in on some of the errors we made and some of the things that most of it that turned out really well. She's a wonderful, I couldn't be prouder as a father, and she is a wonderful example of what happens when you raise your child with principled values and practice to emulate that. I want to invite you to buy the book. I got a wonderful comment yesterday from a comrade I don't know, who said that they had got my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. They read it and they used it collectively, and they had a toxic person in their organizing collective. And from the principles they gleaned from the book, they were able to deal with this person in a healthy, principled way. And that is 100% why I wrote the book. That example I just gave, that made my week. I want to encourage you all to do the same. Please join us next week. We want you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. And I want to comment on my comrade, Erica here, notes to check out the first episode of Hood Communist Radio on SoundCloud and on Spotify. Absolutely, please do that. It's very good, and you will love it. You should support Hood Communists uncompromisingly. Okay, so thank you all. Appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Tell somebody, bring somebody with you next week. Forward ever, backwards never. One unified socialist Africa to Pan-Africanism. Smash white supremacy, smash patriarchy, smash homophobia, capitalism. Everybody already knows it's got to go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.